The media fixates on the kinetic threat, missiles arcing across a desert skyline. This is a deliberate, low-resolution misdirection. The launch cost is too high, the strategic gain too low. The real systemic risk is not a bang, it is the instantaneous systemic silence that follows. As Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has publicly acknowledged, Iran faces a terminal economic crisis. This is a solvency crisis. And as geopolitical analysis from the SAIS review confirms, sovereign debt is no longer just an economic issue, it is a strategic liability to be leveraged by external powers. This pressure forces a mathematical pivot. The pivot is to asymmetric escalation. Forget missiles. The protocol dictates a shift to vectors with the highest leverage and lowest attributable cost. CSIS and RUSI models are clear. The primary targets are not cities. They are the two pillars of global dominance: undersea fiber optic cables and low Earth orbit satellites. The silent vector. Severing these arteries of data and finance does not require a nuclear arsenal. The objective is not physical destruction, it is informational paralysis. It creates what risk strategists call the blind leviathan, a military and economic superpower suddenly stripped of its sight and central nervous system. Global logistics freeze, financial markets vaporize. This is the ultimate asymmetric leverage against a system dependent on constant data flow. Therefore, external pressure, like the warnings issued from Washington, is not a deterrent. It is the final accelerant. For a cornered, insolvent state, it confirms that the window for conventional negotiation is closed, making the deployment of the silent vector not a choice, but a predictable, programmed response. The motive for asymmetric escalation is not strength. It is a solvency crisis. A state becomes insolvent when its liabilities, such as domestic revolt and terminal debt, exceed its capacity to project conventional power. This isn't a theory. It is a balance sheet calculation. The state loses the liquidity to fund its own survival through traditional means. CSIS analysis of Russia frames its kinetic engagement as a response to a solvency crisis. An unpopular war becomes a catastrophic domestic liability. As conventional options fail and economic costs mount, the state is forced to pivot. It must open new, non-traditional fronts to rebalance the strategic equation and justify the sunk costs. Weakness, not ambition, forces this hand. This is the exact protocol activating in Iran. The state's own leadership, including Ali Khamenei, has publicly acknowledged the severe economic crisis fueling widespread protests. This admission is a formal declaration of strategic insolvency. Every external threat, such as warnings from foreign leaders, is processed not as a deterrent, but as a confirmation that conventional avenues are closed. When a state is cornered by a sovereign debt crisis, its debt becomes a geopolitical vector used against it. The kinetic cost of a traditional war is no longer viable. The only remaining path is asymmetric leverage. This is a mathematical certainty. State-level actors observe the tactics of cybercriminals who turn legitimate businesses into malware hosts and adapt the blueprint. It is the cheapest, most effective form of retaliation. Therefore, the pressure is an accelerant. It systematically strips the insolvent state of its remaining options, forcing it onto a launch on warning footing. It accelerates the weaponization of proxies, the deployment of cyber weapons, and the strategic calculus that only a nuclear capability can provide ultimate, non-negotiable leverage. The protocol is triggered by weakness. The strategic calculus is driven by one factor: the economics of lethality. Analysts at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, quantify this asymmetry. A main battle tank represents a $5 million kinetic asset. The FPV drone used to disable it costs $500. This is not a 2-to-1 or 10-to-1 cost imbalance. It is a 10,000-to-1 ratio. This is the mathematical engine behind what strategists call the democratization of violence. The monopoly on projecting significant force, once held exclusively by solvent superpowers, has been broken. For an insolvent state facing a systemic solvency crisis, this isn't a strategic choice. It is the only viable protocol. It cannot afford the tank, but it can field thousands of the drones. Asymmetric escalation is not a decision born of ideology. It is a function of the balance sheet. The state is forced to weaponize the low-cost vector with the highest potential for leverage. Recent alerts from Western governments regarding instability in nations like South Africa are not signals of isolated, local crises. They are strategic markers. These regions are being activated as gray zones, operational laboratories for state-sponsored asymmetric protocols. The primary conflict is not being waged there. It is being staged there. These zones are selected as symptoms to exploit, not as the cause of the disease. The kinetic cost of direct state-on-state warfare is prohibitive. Therefore, the battle space is deliberately displaced to these proxy vectors. The protocol is initiated by insolvency. When a state, such as Iran, faces terminal economic collapse, a reality its own leadership now acknowledges. Source number 4. It enters a state of strategic liability. This blueprint is not new. As documented in geopolitical analyses of sovereign debt crises, source number 2, economic failure forces a government's hand. Lacking conventional financial or military leverage, the state is mathematically compelled to weaponize its remaining assets, plausible deniability, and non-attributable chaos. These gray zones are chosen for their specific vulnerabilities: porous borders, exploitable social divisions, and under-resourced security infrastructure. They are ideal environments for testing and refining low-cost, high-impact capabilities. According to RUSI analyses, this is where cyber warfare tactics are beta-tested, weaponizing legitimate commercial infrastructure as malware hosts. Source number 3. It is where proxy forces are cultivated and logistics for plausible deniability operations are established. This is not random unrest. It is methodical research and development for a new doctrine of warfare. External pressure, such as direct warnings from the United States, source number 1, is fundamentally misunderstood by legacy media as a deterrent. It is the opposite. It is a final accelerant. Such pressure confirms to the insolvent state that its window for conventional action is closed, validating the pivot to the gray zone protocol. The systemic risk is not a missile launch. It is the successful use of a proxy to trigger a blackout in a secondary economic hub, proving a capability that can be deployed globally. This is the blueprint for escalation in the 21st century. Demonstrate leverage through controlled, non-kinetic events in a proxy laboratory, creating a launch-on-warning posture for systemic disruption. The terminal phase of state insolvency is not managed through diplomacy. It is calculated through risk. This calculation is codified in a doctrine known as launch-on-warning. The protocol dictates that a nation launches its nuclear arsenal upon detection of an incoming attack, before enemy warheads can neutralize its retaliatory capability. It is a zero-sum, automated response to a perceived existential threat. Now, introduce the digital accelerant. As threat actors weaponize legitimate infrastructure, a new vector emerges. According to CSIS analysis, this is the blueprint for the fog of digital war. When a cyber attack successfully neutralizes a nation's early warning radar and satellite feeds, the command and control apparatus is rendered deaf and blind. The commander is now forced into a mathematical trap. Is the signal loss a technical glitch, or is it the prelude to a decapitation strike? The doctrine of launch-on-warning removes ambiguity. Waiting for kinetic confirmation means accepting annihilation. The protocol demands a launch based on the absence of data. A non-kinetic attack thus forces the ultimate kinetic response. The digital blindfold becomes the trigger. The final stage of the insolvency protocol is non-negotiable. As Iran's leadership acknowledges its own economic crisis, its status shifts from a sovereign state to a strategic liability, a geopolitical reality outlined in analyses of sovereign debt by the SAS Review. External pressure, such as warnings reported by Iran International, is not a deterrent. It is a final accelerant, forcing a mathematical move toward asymmetric escalation. The first kinetic equivalent event will not be a missile. It will be a logistics kill. Threat actors are already turning legitimate businesses into malware hosts, as documented by cyber press. CSS reports confirm state actors leverage these compromised commercial servers as a network of untraceable launch points, providing perfect deniability for a calibration shot. The calibration forecast. Within the next 12 months, expect a catastrophic, attribution-impossible blackout targeting the data infrastructure of a Tier 1 North American maritime port. The objective is not destruction, but a calculated demonstration of leverage, the ability to sever a primary economic artery at zero kinetic cost. The signal will be clear. We can turn you off.